Hi, I'm James Anderson, helping you develop your children as expert learners. And in particular, over the last few weeks, looking at this idea of mindset, recognizing it's not fixed or growth, but rather it's a continuum. And our job as parents is to nurture and nourish an increasingly growth-orientated mindset in our students, in our children, I should say. And we've been talking about the different fixed messages that sometimes we communicate to our children unintentionally. And I've been giving you some tools and strategies, some understandings about how to create more growth-oriented messages with our children. And today I want to talk about this idea of multiple intelligences. You've probably heard about the idea. Howard Gardner researched it and promoted the idea. And it was interesting that Howard Gardner defined these 7 or 8 different intelligences, kinesthetic bodily and language and maths and all these different ones. And it was interesting that when he wrote his last book, Frames of Mind, his last edition of his work around multiple intelligences, where he sort of gave the work back over to the world and said, I'm done with this now, I'm retiring. The world, do what you want with it. But before you do, let me just be clear about what I think multiple intelligences are. And so in the foreword to this edition, he said he'd made a really interesting observation. He had defined in his work 7 or 8 different ways of getting better, different ways of interacting with the world. You could be musical, you could be spatial, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and so forth. And that in the West, we'd interpret that largely as asking ourselves, well, if there's 7 or 8 different intelligences, which ones have I got? And we use those intelligences to categorize ourselves, to say, well, I'm a mathematical person or I'm an interpersonal person. And when we did that, we created these little boundaries around ourselves to say, well, this is what I'm good at. I'm not good at these things. Don't ask me to do those things. That's not the type of person I am. And we misinterpreted Howard Gardner's work to mean that we were a type of person. And in the foreword to Frames of Mind, Howard Gardner talks about that how in the East, they took a very different approach. In the East, they said, 7 or 8 intelligences, how do I get good at all of them? They didn't use them to categorize themselves. They interpreted the work to say, here are things that we can all get good at. These are things that when we combine it with the work of people like Anders Ericsson to say, well, I can develop expertise in interpersonal, intrapersonal, musical, mathematical, natural, and so forth. And that's the message that 1, Howard Gardner intended, and 2, matches the research, and 3 is the message we need to reinforce with our children. That we're not trying to identify the types of intelligence you have or don't, but rather to say to our children, these are areas, these are intelligences that you can grow, that you can develop, that you can extend, that you can build on. These are areas in your life in which you can develop expertise to allow you to participate in the world in increasingly effective ways. But if you're like me, you probably grew up in a world where intelligence was something you had. Some people had a lot of it and some people had a little bit of it, but not something you could develop or change. But when you look at Carol Dweck's work, that's the absolute foundation of a growth mindset. That we shift our understanding of intelligence as something that we have in a fixed quantity to something that is malleable, something that we can develop through our efforts, that we can literally learn to be smarter. Howard Gardner and many, many others in this field have had their work co-opted through old ways of thinking, and it's actually done a disservice both to their work and to our children. The message we need to make sure we're sending to our children is not how much intelligence do you have, but rather, what are you doing to learn to be smarter? to develop those abilities, those talents, to increase your intelligence. And you can do that, according to Howard Gardner, in 6 or 7 or 8 ways, depending on how you define it. Changing our understanding of intelligence from something you have to something you develop, and recognizing that you develop that intelligence, that talent, those abilities through learnership is a key focus of the work we're doing with your child at school.